Welcome to Relove Guitars, the shed. It's very untidy in here, yet again, but that's because I've got loads going on in the old spraying department and building some guitars, so the spray cans everywhere, and I've got dehumidifiers to get the environment ready for late night spraying. Anyway, meantime, there are still things to do, like setups. I don't know what you can see. If I put this down, you don't see me, which is probably okay. Anyway, so what we've got is we have got Dave's Harley Benton. This is a what do they call it? A VT series, vintage series, I suppose. Harley Benton, Chinese-made, single cut Les Paul style guitar with a rounded neck heel, set neck, rounded heel portion here, which is quite nice. Nice big chunk of Chinese made budget guitar, and I think Dave picked this one up second hand from someone who had upgraded the pickups already, and I don't know, they don't have anything on them, so it'd be interesting to have a, we'll take one out and have a look. So what we've got is a guitar come down for a setup, and it needs it because this is a really good example of a budget electric guitar. You know, as it stands, I took it out of its box the other day and I thought, okay, I'm going to have a little play on this, see how it is, and let's just tune it for a second. Anyway, I thought let's get it out the box and just have a feel of it. And first thing, straight away, yeah, it makes a noise, and you notice how high the action is here. It's about 4. Actually, you know what? It's probably more than that. Yeah, 3. Yeah, easily 3 millimeters at the last fret, which is twice as high as it needs to be. Difficult to play at both ends, so difficult up here. Can't bend to choke out, and really high down this end as well. So actually, this came down to what I think was probably close. It's in fact a millimeter first fret height, which is just terrible. So everything about this guitar is not good, but it's bought second hand, so somebody may well have put this nut on. In fact, I don't know, some people say that this guitar comes with a bone nut these days. I don't know about that, but this is a bone nut, and if that's factory, then it's terrible because it's a millimeter height over the first fret. If it's added on, then okay, it's not Harley Benton's fault, whatever. But there's an interesting debate often comes up because a lot of people who are perhaps, let's say, used to this kind of action, or it doesn't bother them too much, which is fine, I'm not knocking them. They find these things playable straight out of the box, and in my experience, for the kinds of actions that most of the customers who come to me want, these are relatively unplayable in that condition. So they need, as I can tell here, the setup work needed, and that's definitely got to be sorted out. That, even if I could get this thing in tune, let's attempt it, shall we? Even if I could get it in tune, it wouldn't really play in tune. So let's see where the is that my plug? It is. I might be able to plug this in. That'd be good. Yeah. So, it's quite easy. There seems to be a lot of passion of people going, well, of course everything needs a setup, doesn't it? Of course they don't send it out to your spec. Of course it's left for the user to do some sort of setup work. And, I often, you can say to a degree there's some truth in that, right? And of course you can't set up every guitar for every player. It's ridiculous to imagine you can. It's just not feasible. But I have to say there is no excuse for a 1 millimeter first fret action, and that will give you problems with your tuning or your intonation. Hey look, this is going to be a... There we go. Yay. I feel like Mark King from level 42 almost. Anyway, doesn't matter, I'll just leave it where it is because it's nice and high up. So the tuners are quite direct, there's nothing particularly wrong with them. The difficulty in tuning there is that the strings aren't going through the nut cleanly. Oh, delicious. Well, so straight away, one of the things you can notice straight away is when the guitar just seems difficult to get in tune, right? So you tune it, you come back to it. Now a well set up guitar you can be slightly out of tune and it still plays nicely, but this from the outset doesn't. Alright, now this is suffering. This is precisely, I wish I'd, oh I have got my, right, okay. This is precisely what the first fret action, why it matters, and I'll demonstrate it here with this tuner, okay. So now let's say I'm a typical buyer and I've got it home and I'm going, look, spot on E, spot on A, well maybe a little bit, tiny bit flat. There you go, dead on A, dead on D. I knew it was. So even with my experience of tuning up guitars, I started to doubt myself. As soon as I put my hands on that guitar, after having tuned it, even by ear, which was close, there's it, perfectly in tune. Okay, so you do that and you go, right, let's play. Yay! Perfectly in tune. You saw that, right? Let's play. Way! It's hideous. Right? I'm not doing anything to it. You go, Christ, that's terrible, right? And you put it back in there and you go, oh, E, A, spot on, D, spot on, G, B, E. This guitar is perfectly in tune. Okay? I'm going to play you some chords as light as I can. Ready? G. D. A minor. C. F. G. E. A. You go, no, this is awful, and you get your tuner out again and you go, E's in tune. Oh, hang on. Tiny bit, but almost perfectly in tune. B's now slightly flat. But you tune it again, and so you think, oh, maybe it's, if you don't know it, you go, oh, it's the tuners. G seems sharp now. D's okay. A's a tiny bit flat. E's not only, it's just about on. Okay, so So you think about this, right? You've got a guitar that's arrived. You don't know whether the strings have been stretched out or not, right? But even if they had, okay, it doesn't work. And then you go, let's see this. Oh, hang on, let's do this. Can we do it by... We'll do it by this again. So you go, what's wrong? That G is terrible. So you click on the G, and you notice it's gone down a little bit. So there's something not stable about the tuning, which is annoying. But you tune it back up, and then you go, so what chord should this, or what note should this be? So it goes to G, right? G sharp, A, B flat, right? G. Oh look, that's way sharp of G sharp. It's way sharp of A, way sharp of B flat. Eventually it'll smooth out somewhere up here to being in tune with itself, around about there. F sharp is pretty much in tune, but all the notes down here are sharp, and that I don't know how well you can see that. I should give you this in full glorious, because this is so important to how the guitar plays. I'm going to put you on a little prop thing here, prop you up. This is super duper technology. I don't know if how well you can see any of this in the light. That's not too bad. Oh, sorry. You should be able to see. Okay, so watch. We're going to tune the G back up. Perfectly in tune. Harmonic. Pretty good. Right, this should be an A. Ready? Sharp. This should be a G sharp. Way sharp. And that's not even pressing hard. If I press that A hard, like you might normally hold a chord, make it go even sharper. But the lightest I can hold it, it's sharper the note, which is why, although we'll retune all of this, okay, that on its own should play okay, and you've seen already that it doesn't. Now on top of that you have another problem, right, which is there's two things going on here, at least three things. The first thing is that the first fret is so high that your note G, that should be an A when you fret it on the second fret of the third string, is now sharp by miles. That's because that is purely the result of the first fret action being far too high. A 1 millimeter action. It's about at least 5 times higher than it should be. That's the first tuning problem, and even if you took care of the other two I'm about to mention, you would still not be able to live with this guitar, because you'd pick it up and it would still sound like this. Right, never get better than that. But you've got other problems. So you've got A, and you pull the string, stretch it a bit more, and E has become E flat. So you keep on tuning it, and then you go, oh wait, there's still slack in my string, so B becomes flat of B. So you think, okay, well maybe I'll get rid of all of this slack, that G's going to become something else. G became F, and then D will do the same. So you're fighting not only the first fret action being too high, which will make all of your open chords and most of your notes sharp down that, anywhere near the nut, in fact anywhere in the first half of the fingerboard, way flat there. And then you're fighting slack still in the string chain, whether it's in the string or in the posts, it doesn't really matter. It's somewhere in the length of the string you're now, God, it's so flat. Right, so those two things means you will absolutely not stay in tune, and you will not reach for this guitar. But apart from the fact that the action is terrible, and there's bits rattling on it and so on, and the selector button is is loose, but all of those things, you just will not play this thing. E, B, oh god, we went right down there, G, D, A, I can't see the flat there, that's what's doing my head in. Right, E. So that's two things. The high first fret action, that will never cure itself. You're stretching your strings, which you could stretch out with half an hour's work, diligently doing it. And then the third bit is the condition of the nut, which will be holding a different pressure either side. So if the nut grips at all, you'll find that what happens is when you tune it up, the string will drag through and there'll be a tightness on this side and a slackness on that side, which then you bend a note and it'll even up, but it'll, by evening up the tension, it'll do that by putting the note out of tune. So you've got three major things going against you. None of them, by the way, the quality of your tuners. It's got nothing to do with tuning stability. It's absolutely, the first one is the permanent detuning you're going to get from these notes being sharp, because that first fret action's too high. Second one is all the slack still in the strings, which somebody hasn't squeezed out of them, so it will always go out of tune anyway. And the third one is the binding of the nut slots, which you might not even hear or feel, but I could hear it, and the way I know it is that when I try to tune these notes, they don't move in a linear, the note doesn't rise and fall in a linear fashion. I can move this, there's hardly any movement in the note, then it suddenly goes bong in a big step, and that's an absolute sign that the nut is gripping, and you're slackening the string, and then it pulls through and evens out. So this guitar, for those reasons, I picked it up, had a play on it, and I just couldn't live with it. And I've banged on plenty of times now about this thing about when you get down to it, the things that will make you pick up a guitar and go back to it are not the things we're brought up to think are important. So for example, when we're youngsters, we're often brought up to think that brand name is all important, followed by the sort of look of the guitar, followed by, so Gibson, if it's a Gibson it's got to be great, and if it looks fantastic then it's great. Oh, it's got fantastic pickups on it, the tone's wicked, then it's got a pretty shitty playing action, and then it won't stay in tune. Right? That's typical what we find, because we've got our priorities, or the consumer market's got it seems to have its priorities back to front. If you reverse them the other way around and think about it, the reason I pick up a guitar, I can only go on my own experience, but the reason I keep going back to the guitars I've got indoors, because I've set them up that way, the reason I keep going back to them and play them for a long time and never want to put them down is because when I go back to them, they first of all are in tune pretty much. They go in tune straight away in a direct linear positive fashion. They stay in tune while I play them, and secondly, they're really nice low action, easy to play, no buzzes, nice and low, light. Thirdly, they sound great because I've stayed with them long enough to hear the sound they're making. Fourthly, what they look like, I do like the way some of my guitars look, or any guitar I buy, but it's 5 out of 6 in that order of priority, and the last bit is what the brand name is for me. I don't give a toot, hence I make my own. So this one is a good example. It has all of those things going wrong for it, and actually there's no reason why this shouldn't be an absolutely beautiful guitar to play. So that's a bit of a long start up there, but I wanted to use this guitar to make that point, because it really did, when I sat and played this after it arrived, I wanted to put it, the bottom line is I wanted to put it down straight away, and I did, because there was nothing about it that made me want to play it. And I've had these before, and I've played these and set these up before, and they're beautiful guitars to play, and there's nothing about this that essentially should make me want to put it down, except it will not play or stay in tune, first thing. Secondly, it doesn't feel nice to play because the action is shot all over the place. Does it sound nice? Well, to be honest, right, it may have upgraded pickups, but I'm not even sitting with it long enough to explore those. I put this down and I went straight back to my double cut cherry homemade thing on the wall with 2 P90s in it, and it was like coming back to an old friend. This beautiful shaped neck, this beautiful low flat neck, beautiful low action, and then the nice kind of melodic jazzy P90 pickups. And so I sat and played that for an hour. This didn't get 10 minutes. I couldn't live with it. Anyway, I just wanted to illustrate it because this is a brilliant example. So when somebody says on the YouTube channel, yeah, you can play this out of the box, mate, you're just being picky. I'm not. I've got the priorities, what I think is the right way round. Okay, And if you were honest and looked at the guitars that you don't play, I bet you at the bottom of it, it'll be the ones that don't play and stay in tune as the priority, right? That's if you've got musical ear. If you're tone deaf, it doesn't matter whether they're in tune or not, right? You know that. But if you care about them being in tune and the sound, the melodicness of music, then the guitars that you don't reach for, or that you flog on, are the ones that just will not go into tune and stay in tune, right? And then you don't really, the rest of it doesn't matter actually, because if you don't get past that one, they're useless to you. Now this one is, everything about it is perfectly good. It's only about 175 quid brand new. It's one of their sort of top line models. So what it hasn't got in its favour, the nut isn't working properly, the slots are probably too deep in the binding anyway. The action down here is completely mad. The frets actually are in good nick, it's hardly been played, everything's spotless about it. This is rattly and loose, this is swinging around, these changing. These push-pull pots aren't gripping the knobs properly, and they're also stupid design on this guitar. I know it's traditional. The fact that it's a pull on a sloping hat, which is hat style thing, makes it almost impossible to use in live, or in earnest. You can barely get, if you end up trying to stick your finger under them to get them to come up. This should have been push from the beginning. It's just a silly move to put push pulls in. It's totally non-user friendly. Anyway, and the action's way too high, so we're going to take care of all of that and just do it in the normal fashion. I'll hold off looking at the pickups until we get to that stage when the strings are off. So what would I do for my first 3 ports of call? What I want to do is I want to dictate what I want this action to be at the end. The great thing about this setup, as you may have seen before, is on most guitars your playing action is imposed on you by the limitations of either the geometry of the guitar, how it's built or set up, and particularly the underlying condition of the frets. If they're uneven, you're kind of forced to have a high action. Very often those of you, I've had lots of people come to me who say they've taken their guitars to techs, and their guitar, they've gone for like a 50 quid service, which never includes fret leveling, almost never. And so they go, can I have one of your setups please? How much? £55 or £45, whatever it is. And they put it in, and of course the guitar tech is starting from the position that they're not going to do fret leveling, because that's 100 quid extra in their books, right? What they're going to do is they're going to have a look at your thing, they're going to crank your truss rod and maybe try and level your neck a bit flatter for you. They may check the nut and see that's working okay. They'll try and lower the action for you. Now the point is, you've already done that, right? You've already got the action as low as it can go, and you already know that beyond where you've got it, as you give it over to this guy, you already know that going any lower than that is going to buzz, right? So the tech will do this, and they'll get it down as low as they can go, then they'll chuck the strings away, oil the board, maybe steel wool polish, or auto sol or whatever the frets, so they look nice and clean. Give it a clean, fix any obvious little things hanging off, put new strings on, and give it back to you. All right? And they mean well, they've done their 45-50 quid's worth of labour, right? But what do you get back? Well, most of the times, from what I'm hearing from customers, you get back pretty much exactly what you gave them in the first place. In other words, you're expecting, you don't know what to expect, but you're hoping that you'll get back a guitar that you can feel the difference in how it plays. And I've heard far too many people get back a guitar which either plays exactly as it did before, which is much of a muchness. Why would you spend 50 quid to get it back playing exactly the same? You're really paying 50 quid for someone to clean your change your strings and clean your fingerboard. But they either get it back playing exactly the same, or in many cases actually a little worse, because the person's tried to make an improvement and actually you've now got some buzzes back in. So I kind of made up a motto a little while back for me, but it sounds smug, but it isn't meant to be. It's meant to be very serious. And I say that if you can't feel and hear a tangible difference, it actually made me feel, because I'm not really, my job isn't really about the tone, it's about playability. And I say that if you can't feel a tangible improvement, I mean tangible as in I don't have to persuade you, you immediately know that this is better than when you brought it in, then I haven't set it up. As simple as that. If I set it up and you can't feel a tangible improvement worth the money you've paid me, then you can consider that I haven't done anything. If I get to a point in the setup where something prevents me from making an improvement, my job is to tell you and say it's not possible. I'm not going to charge you the full fee to kind of march on through and create no improvement. We'll agree to stop here because it's some limitation that I can't overcome, or maybe would have to cost more to replace some other bit that's getting in the way. But it's a really important thing because there's too many people, sadly, who've paid money. You know, the tech has done their couple of hours work. You know, they feel they should get paid for that labour, but what ultimately they haven't done is improved it tangibly in a way that the player was hoping. And you shouldn't have to hope. You know, it should be. Well, I suppose that's the good thing about doing it the way I do it, is that I know that this will improve. I can tell you right now this is going to transform this guitar, and that's why it's going to cost the £100 that I charge for my setup fee, because it's going to take me 3 hours, but you're not paying for the 3 hours, you're paying for the tangible difference that this will make. It just so happens it takes 3 hours, and that's my business, and I have to say, is that worth it as a business model? Yes, it is. Not bad an hourly rate for doing something I enjoy. But that's behind the scenes, that's my stuff, it's not your problem. Your problem is the improvement in this worth the money you're paying me? And too many people are paying money and not getting any improvement, and that shouldn't be the way it is. Anyhow, enough of that. But so you know what the if you've seen my stuff before, you know what I'm going to do. I'm going to, with this method, I can set the action that we want, or my customer wants, first, and then what we do is we make the underlying guitar, particularly the frets, comply with that. So I can guarantee if you this action right now, I'll just write it down. Actually, it's always a good start point. We'll go the last fret action, which is where I like to measure it. Actually, it's not that. That's quite low. I mean, that's about 1.3. 1.3 on the last fret, but we know it's 3 on the low E. Now that might be because somebody who played this before loves hitting that really hard, and that's the only way they can make it work for them, but I don't really know. So that's not ideal from a playing perspective. We know that this first fret action is actually greater than 1mm, or at least 1mm, which is, like I said, maybe, being generous, it's at least 3 times more than I would set it, and it's at least twice as high as is going to guarantee to bring you tuning issues when you play. Now I'm actually running out of being able to see these darn things. Now I know this is a 3 and I know that's a 4. What the hell's it? Where's the 50? Is there a 50 involved in here, or have I just lost my mind? There was a 50 in here. Oh, it's still in here, that's why. Oh. So let's go, what are we going to make? Let's go 110 to begin with. So we go 90 plus 30, that's 120, right? That's a big chunk. If this plays, and we know how tall that gap is. Okay, it's not that much. What are we going? We're going to go 50, let's go 50 and 40 then. 50 and 40. Maybe I'm over exaggerating. Okay, alright, I was exaggerating. It's 0.9. Is that 50 or 60? That's 50, we don't have a 60. So that's 0.9, which is 3 times as much as I would set it at. And it's about the same on the other side. So we go 0.9 for the first fret action, low E, last fret, and high E. Now the only other thing I just want to have a quick look at is the amount of relief in the neck, because basically my setup involves choosing what all these 3 settings should be, and that's actually quite tall for this sort of guitar. I mean, it's about 0.35, 0.4, maybe a little bit more. Let's see if we can find out exactly what it is, because I'm always eyeballing it. I often go on about not really being bothered by what the actual numbers are. I kind of go with, if this looks about the right amount for this guitar from experience, I'll go with that. Really, I wonder if I can clean these up, because I have lost the ability to read it. Maybe I should buy some new ones. Right, well, let's start with a 0.4. We don't really want it to be as high as 0.4, do we? God, it is. So it's way too high. Okay, let's go back to where the 0.5 has snuck away again. Yeah, so this is actually too high, so we don't want this much relief by quite some long shot. You want to go halfway between the 2 points, and I usually just eyeball that. I don't bother counting along the frets. And that's I say we're actually quite high. That's about 0.7 in total. So that's too much curvature. And will the guitar play okay? Of course it will play okay. In fact, in some ways it will play quite well because there's loads of room for the strings to move. What it will feel like is even when you've set a low action here and here, it'll still feel like quite a lot of height of action here, and it won't feel as slick and smooth as it can. So to begin with, we don't really want to start with anything near as high as that, 0.7-ish. We want to set something down to about 0.1 or 0.2, which of course is going to involve tweaking the truss rod. Now, to reiterate, the three things I like to set before we make the guitar comply, remember, it's we choose the action we want and the shape of the neck and everything. The things that contribute to make up the basic playing action, which is height of the bridge, height of the strings over the first fret, and the curvature of the neck in between. There are a lot of other things that affect how the guitar feels to play in terms of height of the frets, the scratchiness of the frets, the time of day you're playing, your mood, whether your fingers are sore or whatever. Obviously there's a myriad variables that affect how the guitar feels to play, but in terms of the physical action, playing action, bridge height, first fret action, or height over the first fret, and curvature of the neck in between. So I have some numbers that I work to that consistently give good results, and they're only for that reason. So I don't care where they come from. I didn't get them from Fender's website or Gibson's, and I don't change them for different guitars unless it's an acoustic, pretty much. Maybe sometimes a jazz style guitar, which is people typically don't want to have play so low. But if somebody wants a low fast electric guitar action on any kind of electric guitar, I can set for the same figure, the same target figures. Now remember, the figures are just a means to an end. The end is a well playing light guitar that stays in tune, plays in tune. The figures I use as a means to that end are maximum 1.5 on the low E last fret, about 1 to 1.2 millimeters on the last fret high E, about 0.2 maximum neck relief in the middle, and 0.3 maximum of a millimeter over the first fret. So I'm going to set all of those three. Now remember I said to you that up here we're choked out, so even at 1 millimeter right now, or 1.3 millimeters ish, this can't play. There's something getting in the way, and it's the frets. Now it may be an individual high fret, or it may be the peculiarity of the Les Paul neck, which is a bit of a sickle shaped thing. So you've got a curved bit here, and then where the neck thickens up and joins the body, it sort of flattens out because it can't bend. So you get a curve, it comes up to a handle, flat handle, and that can get in the way of interrupt the clearances needed to bend strings. But there's no reason why it shouldn't play well, and my method of fret leveling actually evens that out quite nicely, as you'll see in a bit. So we know already that at 1.3 millimeters it can't play bends, so we have to do some work to make it play. We also know that on this side the action is just way too high for normal human mortals. Now, as I'm cranking these things up and down, you'll also be completely aware, as is rather obvious, that all of these things are interrelated. So if I take down this to 1.5 now, and then I reduce the action very considerably down at the first fret, then it will also reduce this a little bit. So I'm playing in a range of figures between this and that. All right, it's not a precise science. It's just being aware of. If you're obsessed by numbers, you get completely screwed up by, well, if I adjust that, then that won't be 2.1, and how do I work out if I take 0.6 of a millimeter off this one, then how much I have to put back on there because that's gone down. Forget it. All right, you just know that they interact with each other. The relief, the last fret action, and the first fret action are interrelated. If you know that, you'll know that having set this at 1.5 and 1, or 1.3, let's take it to 1, let's push the test. Okay, so we start with our notional, that's a bit low now, we start with our ideal action, right, at the bridge, right, and you'll see in a minute that this now will change as soon as I start doing other things. Get there. Okay, just over 1, Yeah, over 1.5. Okay, so that's our target action there. Now I'm going to pretend I've lowered the first fret action by, for example, let's say I lowered it really too much, and I lowered it so much that in fact the strings are on the first fret, right? That's like I've capoed it almost. Now what happens is it's still nice and low, but suddenly this has now gone down a bit. Oh yes, and it's gone down to, you know, this is just over 2, and this is now sort of just under 1. So it's taken a whisker off. Now I know that when I actually do this nut thing, it isn't going to be quite as low as that. It's going to be nearly as low, but it will take a tiny bit off. But I got a sense of how much it takes off there. So that's fine by me. I'll just leave this right where it is. If I really want to be cautious, I'll go up to 1.6 and then let the adjustment down here take that last little bit down to 1.5-ish. But I'm starting with my 1.5 on my 1.1-ish. Now the issue of the neck relief, we don't want it at 0.7, we want it at 0.2 at most, maybe even slightly flatter than that. So what we have to do, I've lost one of my things. We have to find the right hex key for this guitar, which happens to be this one. Now right now it's running with some 9-gauge strings, okay, and the load of the strings and whatever the environmental factors and so on causing the neck to bend quite a fair bit. So what we have to do is tighten the truss rod to counter that bend. So that's if it's the right thing. Is it? Yeah, it is. Right. So I've tightened that. Now, how much did I tighten it? Just some. I could feel it tightening. And what that will do is that it will cause a curvature in the opposite direction in the rod inside the neck, and that will dial back the amount of bend of this organic thing called the neck. Now, do I know anything has happened? Right, put this down on here, do it again. Yeah, that's taking that down quite a lot. Now the thing about adjusting the truss rod is it may continue reacting. Because it reacted that quick, I don't think it will. Sometimes it takes longer to react, and you might think, right, I'm good to go, and then half an hour later you find suddenly there's no clearance at all. But actually this is absolutely fine. It's very low now. So it's the lower this is, the flatter this is, and the lower that action is over the first fret, and the lower target end action we've chosen. Those three things conventionally conspire to make a low, fast, light action. But the lower you go in all of those areas, the more precise your underlying frets have to be in order to not end up buzzing, rattling and so on. Now I'm not prejudging this guitar. I know that it can't handle bends up here, which would be no good to a lead guitarist at all. Can't even get half a tone. Bees choking. The G can barely play on its own. Now, truth is, having flattened the neck now, we expect this action to go down a little bit. So I would recheck it, and you can see that it backwards and forwards a bit, right? You don't have to be worried about this. Just go back and go, what do I know? I know that overall 1.5 and 1.2 here versus about 2.2, 1.1 to 0.2 relief, and about 0.3 minimum over the first fret. Those things together equal a good action. So you just go back and look at it again. You know that each one slightly affects the other, and you go, right, having flattened the neck, where are we now? Well, that's actually a little bit low now. So you go back up to your 1.5, right, the target. Here's about it there, and you look on this one, and that's a bit under the mark. You struggle to get below a millimetre. You will struggle. In fact, you won't get it to play. And maybe on an SG you can get about a millimetre. They're pretty good, and sometimes on Ibanez's. Okay, 1.5, 1.1-ish, 1.2-ish. That's pretty good target action. That's still too high. I've got to sort that. When that goes down, this will go down a little bit too. Remember, we'll double check it afterwards. So how do we've addressed this. We flatten that out. We double check the neck relief. Still a bit of space. Good, not much. Now we've got to take care of this. And what are we going to do with this? Well, we are going to replace it with a Tusq adjustable nut, for which I've made my own milliput base. Now these things were originally made by, well, the story of these is they came about because On recent, or more recent I should say, Gibson Les Pauls, Gibson started to make a brass 0 fret, adjustable 0 fret kind of arrangement, which comprised of two pieces, a bass unit and an insert in the middle, and the insert had two kind of prominent bits sticking up. Well, it had two screws so you could raise it and lower it inside the bass unit, and the back one was slotted like a nut behind a typical 0 fret, and the front one acted as a 0 fret and the strings launched off the top. And they made it in brass, and apparently, I never saw it in the flesh, but apparently it notched very easily, as all 0 frets do, because the strings are permanently sitting on the 0 fret in that kind of situation. So Gibson's solution, I believe, was to manufacture a titanium version, but in the meantime Tusq did a clever thing and they designed an insert to fit that. So it's not the same, because it's obviously it's more of a traditional nut, it's not got the 0 fret deal, but it's made of Tusq, so it's good and slippery for strings, and it has two little grab screws and then a little sort of shaped base. And basically, if you had the Gibson brass bass, you pop it in there and just raise it and lower it to where you want it, doing away with all the faffing around with nut files. Most of the faffing. Sometimes you have to kind of match the radius of the neck with the radius of this, which isn't always the case. But if it's a Les Paul, this is suited to a Les Paul, not least because the strings splay in a Les Paul fashion. Now, the point I was going to make is that having noticed that Tusq made one of these, I grabbed them, and ever since that I've been installing them on every 3-a-side guitar that I've made or have set up for people, because if you're investing money in a good quality setup, then I just basically offer it now as part of, at cost, and the cost of these is about 14 quid for the unit, and I charge a couple of quid extra for making the bass, so about 20 quid in all for doing this. But that gives you it gives you a replacement nut that is going to be permanently adjustable. It does away with the grabbing, locking, friction, which causes the tuning instability. So to take this off, I'm going to tap off that nut. I had somebody complaining about, oh, you can't hammer a nut off the end. Of course you can. They're not. By the time I come to knock a nut off, I already know how it's fitted. Right, that one's very lightly fitted with a tiny piece of glue, and that's fine. I don't even have to knock it. But sometimes they've been done with a lot more glue, and you have to hit them, and you have no option. And actually, you can't get any blade down the side of the thing to loosen it. You just have to tap it with care and a little bit of force. Now, what you see there is, you can see the bass unit is way too high, and that's fine. I just basically need to, I can do a very quick measurement, which isn't that difficult. I can just say, how high is this roughly? Let's do it in mils. Let's do it again just to be certain. Best of two. If I can get it to work. So we're looking at 5.5 mils, and then above that we're going to have the height of the nut itself, and it slopes upwards. So the point being is, if I were to make the base 5.5 mils, then the nut would sit quite a lot proud of it, and we wouldn't have any downward movement. We don't really want the whole unit to sit flush, because then we'd be right up on the stand. So we want somewhere in between. So we don't want this to be 5.5. We probably want this, or we could do a measure and see what the actual lift is. So 5.5 of hole, and then 3.5 of nut face. So that is in total 9, right? Yeah, 5.5 plus all of this height is 9. But like I say, we don't want all of that. We just want some of that. We want that to start lower. So we will take off. We will take off at least half of that. Half of that. Let's take off. 2 be enough? No, let's take off half. Let's go to 2. Okay, so we want 5.5 and 2, 7. So we want this whole 7.5. we want this whole unit here to measure 7.5 to the top or to the thingy, and I can show it. Well, you can't see it, it's a bit too hard to see from there, but I can just, I'll go to the sort of middle string and just get it pretty much lined up, and then I'll just make a mark on there, and I'll be conservative and I'll draw the line to the outside of it to give us time to sort of work up towards it conservatively. Alright, so cut just under it, and there's my line. So I've got a lot of extra material that I don't need. What I'll do is, in this case, you could sort of chisel it off, or you could sand it off, or even what's the word, bandsaw it off. But I don't want to risk breaking this stuff. It's meant to be sanded and drilled mainly, so sawn not so good. So I'd rather go slower. And what you can do, I suppose, is we could file it. That's one way of moving it in bulk moving material. If I just sort of prop it up as safely as possible. It will take a while to sand only, so it's probably helpful if we do get some of the bulk gone. Anyway, so it's you can see this is a little bit of fiddle to install it, and I've been doing some experiments trying to make, in fact I've got a couple here, trying to make, I'll see if one of these will work as well, making resin bases for these nuts. And it's a little bit hit and miss because the resin mix, or the resin compounds that I've got, are actually very sensitive to different combination of amounts. What's that word? Proportions. Yeah. So one day you get them into a perfect consistency which supports the weight of the nut as a sort of. I'm not very good at these things. What do you call a thing that pushes into a mould to make a shape? Anyway, so to make the base unit of this, you see, I have to push the nut into this shape here, into this resin while it's wet, and it tends to sort of end up just either it doesn't go into it, or the resin's too stiff to begin with, and then the nut sinks, or it's too wet and the nut sinks in, which isn't really good. Anyway, I've got a few here that were experiments, and actually none of them right now. Actually, you know why none of them are working? Because they're actually from this is a slightly different sized piece. The basic moulding thing I used actually feels slightly different size to the Tusq nut that I got recently. That's quite interesting. So they may have come from slightly different production lines, or different days or batches or something. There's a very slight difference, but maybe with a bit of fiddle I can modify. That's almost there. That's probably a good one, as good a one to start with, if I can just get it to match up. The resin for me is a slightly more preferable material, only because it's has a little bit stiffer, I think, or a little bit harder base. Yeah, see, that one doesn't want to go in there. That's because I think there's some of the original mould still attached to it. So this is obviously the work in progress, is how to do this. If I had a 3D printing kind of facility, I'm sure this would be a piece of cake for just knocking out these things to a careful blueprint shape. But when you're sort of doing it with weird odds and bods at home, it's not quite as simple. So that end of it doesn't quite receive it. Well, that does. That's not bad actually, that way around. Split now. Come on. Anyway, you probably should have just switched off the what's it on this, because you probably don't want to get bored. But this is what I'm end up trying to do. I'll cut the camera while I've got a few of these. I think I'd rather use this than the Miller Putt if I can do it. But I just got to find the one that feels like it's most ready to play. It definitely is a slightly different sized unit from the one that I made this mould with, which is something I didn't anticipate. I genuinely thought that every single one of these would be the same basic size. It's not an unreasonable expectation. Now that gets to where, that's the front edge of the nut, kind of gets to where, pretty much where I want it to be. But it probably still need a little adjustment. Right, I'll do that off camera a minute, see you in a sec. Right, I just had to turn the radio off because some religious ignorant nutcase was talking. Look, I've just hand finished the resin one, so I'm going to use that instead because it's a better colour anyway. So there we go. Right, having tweaked it myself, this should now drop into place. Oh, well, let's just make sure before I do that the end here isn't clogged up with glue or anything. It's a bit of crunchy stuff, so we can get rid of that. And then, just to begin with, we drop it in there, check out where it lands and how it sits. Oops, that's not okay. So that's not quite sitting in the slot yet, so we need to thin that down. And we're going to do it on which side? That's the right side for that. We're going to do it on the back side of this. So let me just draw a mark on it so I know which side we're dealing with. So rather than adjust anything there, I'm just going to thin this down a tiny bit until it fits in there. And I don't have to do it with the whole piece in there, I can just do it with this bit. And all I have to do is make sure it stays square and cuts evenly. That's the game. And again, just basically keep going until it's the right size. This is probably due to some fresh sandpaper in here now. It does get worn out pretty quick. It's very handy having a block of sandpaper always ready. Okay, so this is very narrow. I mean, it's quite a precise little thing to get this fitted, hence the bit of extra time and effort going into it. What's nice about it is even this little relatively flimsy looking thing, once it's in place, it'll just hold the nut perfectly still for the whole time that you're playing the guitar. Let's just make sure I got it around the way I want it first. Is that the way I want it? So that back end, no. There's usually a sort of way round that it wants to go. That's the way round. Okay, tiny bit squaring up here. Nearly there. Yeah, you know, early days for making these little little containers, base unit container things. Maybe, you know, I've got a friend here and there, some people who have things like 3D printers who can help me out sometime not too distant future, so that will be cool to know. Right, this is still almost there. The main thing really is the strength of this isn't that important. What it has to do is it just has to provide a footing for the nut grub screws to touch on, and then once they're touching it, that's all it really needs. So I could just about fit that in there. It's almost in the right size now, so it's incredibly fine tuned. I mean, if it was a moving part, it would be a bit flimsy, but it isn't. So it kind of sits in there. And actually what's amazing about this is we can probably get this to sit in there without any glue if we really wanted to, but I think I'd rather it was a tiny bit looser than that before we let it alone. I can remember which way around it is now. Front edge, front edge, front edge. Okay, that's pretty much there. Actually, you don't even have to do anything. So there's the unit sitting in place. The only thing I want to know at this point in time is it sitting all the way down? It looks it. Do we need to take any more off? than that. I mean, if we had to, we could always take a bit off the nut, but this is actually quite a shallow slot. Now, the way to check it is to get a blade and seat the blade in there and go, right, how much above the fret are we sitting, and it's still too high. So we'd either want to take a bit more off the base of this, or if we had to, take a bit off the base of this one here so it sits further down in there. But I'll go with the base of this. So you see, it's, you know, each guitar has a different nut slot, a different depth, and some I found, like Epiphones, tend to have the very tall nuts, which makes them interesting when you come to swap things out, because you go to just replace the nut and suddenly you realise you've got to either find a different size nut or shim it in some sort of way. Right, that's sort of just about there. Right, we should be at a start point. And it is a shallow, it's definitely a shallow nut slot here on this guitar. On some guitars, I've actually, on single coil guitars, I've actually just stood the thing on its, on the wood, which has seemed to have worked perfectly well actually. But so I say the alternative is to take this down a little bit. I don't want to go too far down here. I don't know how thick that bass is. If we go too far, we might end up just running out of strength in the bass, which sort of defeats the whole point of it. It's a very sleek little thing now, but its only purpose is to provide a platform for the feet of the adjustable nut, and really just to help it from not moving side to side. That's its main function. Okay. Well, it's the quickest way to find out now. Is just chuck one of these easier strings back in. Okay, and that's still a little bit too high in my book. Let's press some tension on it. Yeah. Okay, we still have to reduce it. And the way we might want to reduce it, if I can now get it out again, is to take down a bit of this. Now we can do that with or without the grub screw involved. And actually, I don't mind getting the grub screw involved, because if we do it with the bit of grub screw sticking out, we get rid of a bit of extra length of the screw, and we also put a sort of flat spot on it which spreads its weight, so it's not as sticky out. So that's the screw getting bit. Okay, a little bit forward on that. Okay, a little bit on this end. Okay, so we've taken a bit of height off that, which is fine, and now we can take a little bit of height off this shell surrounds of here, because the knot isn't going as far down. Now, obviously this looks like a load of hassle, but when I finally perfect the art of making these little bases, everything will feel a lot easier. This is just kind of making it up as I go along a bit. Okay, now let's see what we've got. Let's just level this up now. Okay, that should be flat. Okay, let's try this one in here. still a little bit high, so it's quite tricky to get this one right. I mean, in reality, it probably works even better to just stick that on the front, on there. That's almost the right height to begin with, but oh well. Trying to get everything down to the right height, that's the only slightly difficult part of this game. Get it the right way around. In you go. Oh, right, not in you go. In you don't go. Front bit sticking forward. Yeah, it's not the best fit I've ever had, only just because I've sort of hand adjusted it really, but it'll work. You wait and see. What we really want is to start off being on the floor. So let me just take out, we'll wind these out a little bit, see if we get any further reduction. Okay, right now still a little bit too tall. Could have left this all off camera, but you like to see, I'm sure you like to see what goes on. So what I've got is I'm going to take down, I'm looking at this, it's going to come up a little bit. That's I'm just trying to balance out which bits I lower and make sure it still works the way I want it to work when it's all worn down. If I go too low, then I'll go back to the milliput one, which I started out with and then changed my mind on. Okay. So let's get this full out. I mean, you could argue that it would be more effective to cut a deeper slot in here, you know, just to start with that as an easier start point. And it might be the case, but we didn't. So this is my hand crafting. This is just experimental time. It's obviously not very productive time, but since I don't do editing other than stop and start, it's going to have to stay on here. Come on, flatten out the bottom, please. I was shocked the other day when I went to download some videos that I've done of a setup, and my computer decided to tell me that my hard disk could no longer access my folder with all the videos in progress. It could read them, it said, after about half an hour, but it declared that it couldn't write or amend the files, so and then it recommended I do something with them, copy them somewhere in a hurry. Of course it's a huge amount of data, so copying them in a hurry is not really a realistic possibility, so I kind of put it to one side and unplugged the ailing hard disk, left it, didn't touch it for a couple of days whilst busy ordering a new hard disk, 2 terabyte hard disk, and when that arrived, then just checked in with my old hard disk to see if it would start up again. Okay, I'm just going to keep working on this a little bit, sorry about this, just to get it down to the depth I want. Yeah, so I got the other hard disk and plugged it in, and then proceeded to try out my old hard disk to see if it could read the files enough to copy them, and amazingly it did. So I was able to copy off pretty much everything, which is kind of my entire digital archive of everything, from one ailing hard disk to a new one, which ultimately in its own time will end up conking out as well, as they all do. So it's just moments like that you really feel hostage to technology, actually, because you think actually everything digital, or every memory or everything I've got archived lives in this, on this hard disk, which is without doubt going to conk out at some point. Okay, now I've got it down to a point where strings appear to be almost touching the frets. And I think when I put this under load, I think they may just about touch the frets, and that's kind of what we want, because we just want that tiny bit of upwards twist on the screws. Yeah, I think we're there. And this will settle it, it'll press it down hard. Okay, perfect. Sorry it took so long. It's one of those things that's worth getting right, because this is the heart of the guitar, the nut and how it plays. Okay, so that is sitting there nice and securely, and now we have what looks like exactly the same height all the way across. It's almost correct. So let's get a rough note from somewhere. Yay! So now we have a nut. Is that quite? No, it's not quite that. Well, it's sitting in as far as it wants to go. Maybe with a tiny bit more on the edge. I just want it seated as perfectly as can be. I don't want it moving anywhere. So just bear with me. We'll get there. You see how it works anyway. Of course, if you try to buy the brass unit from Gibson, Lord above knows how much that would cost you to buy. I don't. So it's obviously not a feasible option. So the challenge was to make my own and find a way to I've forgotten which end is which now. Yeah, make my own basically and get them working. Now will this work? Is that still? It's still. No, that's kind of working. No, you know what? It needs a milligram more. A milligram more. Come on, you can do it. You can do it. How are we doing it? There and there. That should be enough. Okay, are we ready? How are we going going to sit all the way down in. Yes, we are. That's good. Right. A little looser now, so ultimately when time comes I will put a tiny bit of glue on the bottom of that. Meanwhile, this will sit, I guess, that fraction lower, which is fine. And then I will use the what's-its to turn it up. Input. Start with a rough guide. There we are. Now it's buzzing on the first fret now, which is exactly what I want. So now all we do is we get this end of the thing where it's buzzing and we raise this to give it the action we want. Hurrah! Oops, don't press on there, no, that's fine. And then do a little bit of a pull, take a stretch out for the time being. I should have done something else while the strings were off, but I didn't. This one's sticking up, and is that because it needs to be wound in? Yeah, it's not touching the bottom yet. Now it is, but I don't want it to go any higher than that. There we go. Lovely. Right, after all of that messing about, what we'll find is that this action will have changed because we've now lowered the first fret action considerably. I've got crap lighting here at the moment. We've got just over 1 and we're just under. So now we just resolve this out a little bit and out a little bit. Double check, and then we'll be ready, kind of ready to move and do our next bit. 1.25, just on 1.5. Perfect. Okay, turn that off. So the next bit, having now got this action right, that action right, I would say that's, we could go up or down, but we've got the adjustability now, you see. That's the beauty. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these strings off again. 2 reasons. Because next stage is the fret leveling stage, where we make the frets do what they should have done. Well, I say should have done, but it's impossible to lay a perfectly flat set of frets, whether you're a factory or an individual. So it just isn't, it doesn't happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fret level now. The last part of this last major part of the setup process is to fret level to get these frets to behave themselves. Okay, so let me just check my way around. This is, it's just slightly idiosyncratic now. Right, that's the correct way around, I think. Let's try it the other way just to see. No, it's not that way around, it's that way around. Okay, that way around. Tiny bit of glue, let's keep it still. Get that on, squeeze it into place, quickly line this up first and foremost, because really we want this string position to tell us where that nut dries in place. And if I could grab the strings, oh no, I don't want to do that yet. Oh, let's just make sure that's lined up where we want it, please. Come on. Okay, that'll do. That'll do. Right, now the reason I took the strings off is because I want to mark up the frets. Ready for fret leveling. So this has taken longer than normal for the simple reason that I've been messing about with a custom made base for the nut. But assuming, and I hope to assume, that I'll get that perfected without so much time wasting, but once I get that sorted out, then it will be a pretty standard procedure, although there's going to be some amount of sanding because of the different nut heights or slot heights, depths for each different guitar. There's no two that are exactly the same, so there will always be some degree of adjustment required, but it shouldn't take too long if I've got the basic bass unit bits correctly shaped, which is just trial and error. Okay, now we'll go for a tune up again. This guitar has the strings coming over the top of the stop bar in a sort of wrap, top wrap sort of way of doing things. I'll leave them there as long as it works okay. Some people prefer the way it feels. I'm not sure I could really tell the difference, but some people swear by it. Nice. Okay, so before I do the last of the fret level-y bits, I'm just going to check my main things again. First of all, fret relief in the neck, hardly any but some, that's cool. First fret action, quite low, probably a little higher than I would normally have, but we can start where it is. It's not critical for this fret leveling part, but it'll be an action choice for the final overall setting. And then we have 1.5 tad over and 1.1, so that's good where it stands. Nice. Now we're ready to do the fret leveling. Now what I'm going to do is I'll do this part of it now, and then I'm going to take a break and come back and do all the polishing stuff a bit later on. So the fret leveling is a really nice little technique and uses the truss rod, and quite a few people say, how do you make the truss rod? Well, it's really easy. You get a truss rod and you stick self-adhesive tape to it, and either put your own tape on and put a piece of, I use 400 grit sandpaper on, or you buy some self-adhesive sandpaper and do it that way. But I think I've got self-adhesive sandpaper bought from a Portuguese supplier, but I think eventually that's going to run out, and I'll be looking at just doing my own version. But anyway, it's a truss rod, and the beauty of it is, with these three little metal feet, which are all the same size, it allows me to curve the truss rod just as much as the neck is curved. Now, it's quite interesting with this neck is that it's sort of going like this and probably a bit up there, so technically if I match that up, it's probably a tiny bit shallower than actually needs be for this guitar, because it's not quite the true curve. There's what I call a knuckle here, but my experience has shown, providing I get this to show as if it's following the same curve by touching all three of these feet equally, and I adjust it to make sure it does, providing it's touching, it's following the overall curve, even if there's a little blip here, my experience has shown that it will the curve in this thing will gently scoop out any knuckly bit here. So I start with that, place it in what I call the E track, which is the space occupied by the high E string when it's moving. Obviously there's a kind of direct line that it goes down, there's a bit of room either side. And the first thing I do is pretty much, not with hardly any pressure at all, just with mostly gravity, I just kind of run up and down a bit and see what I come up with. And it's a good diagnostic, it's quite a good device for showing what's going on. And it's showing it's cutting all the frets pretty much equally, which isn't bad at all. There's a couple of low ones up here which it's not touching hardly at all, which is a slight worry, because that's often the case that the low, well, it is the case that the low frets actually are the ones that effectively create the next fret as high. So your guitarist tends to be limited by the low frets. But the first thing I want to know is, do all the notes play? Now that's a low one, so the next one appears high, hence it's just a little bit zizzy. So to just ease that out, I'm going to go back in there. So I take the string off, come back here with the same setting on the truss rod. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to kind of focus, I suppose, if you like, a bit on this end. I'm just holding it down so that the truss rod stays on the track and doesn't fall off. And if I'm putting any pressure on at all, it's kind of towards this end, but it's not a lot of pressure. It's just repetitive rubbing backwards and forwards. Now what I'll tend to do is it'll probably take a little bit more off a couple of these frets here, and just until we just, I suppose you could call it bottoming out to the low fret. And it isn't a massively low fret, but it's just enough to make that tiny zizzing. And that's cleaned up. Now we know that that's playing, but that's not the whole story, because we also need to make sure it plays all the way when we bend it at this low action, and that we'll only know when we come to level out the what I call the B and the G track, because that's where the note is going when you're pushing it, when you're bending it, if you're a right-hander. It goes the opposite way if you're a left-hander. So what I do now is, as I'm using the same track, the E track, to calibrate the tool, so I'm just making sure nothing's changed, and then I'm going to now move the B string out of the way and use this little rubber spreader, and that gives me access to this B track. And now I'm going to work on this, and again steadying the tool, mostly gravity, a little bit of a push, and then I'm kind of looking out to see the things it's telling me in a sort of diagnostic sense. And it's very good for this, and with experience you get to really recognise or learn to spot what's going on. So a bit of a high fret here, a drop off there, which is okay, cutting fairly consistently, a bit of a high fret there. Now I'm kind of expecting the notes to play as I go up here, but the really important bit is, will I be able to bend the E across? A little bit of ziz, a little bit of ziz there, a little bit there. So I'll do a little bit more. So you can see in the first run I'm concentrating mostly on the playability at the moment of the individual notes, and once I've taken care of that, then I'm going to, next thing, when I've got everything in the B string playing, I'm going to then have a look and see how the E string now bends across the B string. And you may find that it now bends whereas it didn't before, because the amount of clearance, or the amount of high fret required to, there's a high one there, see, the amount of height of a fret, excessive height required, or that it takes to choke off the bending string. Is that rattling? Yeah, we've got a loose jack plug as well. The amount required to choke off a bend is tiny. Okay, see? Couldn't do that before. Not perfect. So you see what's nice about that method is unlike any other fret leveling methods, you can hear the improvement straight away. So I now know that just when I've done a tiny bit more in this B track, I can stop leveling and move on to the next track, because I've actually freed up all the notes that I need to free up. I don't even need to test this, I'm going to stop there and move on. I've freed up all the notes individually, and what I've also done is I've freed up the bends that you heard at the beginning wouldn't play at all. And I've even gone down a tiny bit on the action since then. So I've improved the action and freed up the bends. Now what that does tell you, this is flattening out a little bit now, that's interesting, just a tiny bit. What that does tell you is that the measurements or the distances we're talking about that either get in the way of, you know, the measurements of how much fret is blocking that note when I'm trying to bend it an hour ago, whenever it was, is absolutely tiny. But it's, you know, you want it out of the way, you want it, and this is what the precision fret leveling does. Now there are some caveats to this, and there are some kind of laws of diminishing returns that are at play with this. So one of them involves neck radii. So you can get a low light playing action on a Gibson Les Paul style guitar, mainly or a lot because it's got a relatively flat radius, a 12-inch radius. If this was a vintage Strat with a 9.5, the geometry of that bend, it's a tiny bit zizzy up there, the geometry of that tight radius means you can't, there's a limit to what you can actually do. You can't, you're pushing a string up a fairly steep hill where when both the string's anchor points are at the bottom of the hill, and that dynamic takes away any clearance you would otherwise have to bend strings. So if you want to bend strings on a vintage tight radius like a 7.25 or even a 9.5, sometimes you basically have to sacrifice you give up on some of the low action. You have to go up a little bit, and there's no way around that. If you continue just trying to level your way to clean bends, you'll just cost yourself fret metal. So again, that's one of the kind of experience-based judgment calls you have to learn to spot. So I've done this now probably 600 plus times to mostly very good results. Occasionally, a guitar has travelled somewhere to a completely different environmental condition, different climate or something like that, after having done this precision work. And of course, the clearances are at this level of action so small that a climatic change can snaffle that clearance required to make it play. And so in a way, sometimes this method can be a victim of its own success, but it's still worth doing because it only takes usually the tiniest of adjustments, if that's the case, to restore it, because you basically have a good set of level frets underneath. One of the reasons, I've mentioned a million times before but not on this video, one of the reasons that there are two kind of reasons why I do it with the strings on this way, and it isn't my invention. Somebody invented a tool that did this, and I learned the technique from that. But the two primary reasons I do it this way, the first of them is because I find it's the most respectful, or it preserves the most fret metal possible. It takes the least amount because you set the action and you work down to it because you've got the strings on, and you know when you stop because you've got the notes playing at the action we've set. That preserves a lot of fret metal that it equals the life of the guitar, so that's a very massive plus. To be honest, that alone is probably the biggest reason why I do it, and the curvedness of the operation, the fact that I'm leveling with a curved fingerboard and a curved tool, is kind of secondary. It's not really important in and of itself. It's only curved because the strings are on and loaded, and the benefits of it being loaded is, as I say, that I can test it and stop when I've got the action that I've set at the beginning playing perfectly, and I don't do any more leveling than that. A second benefit of it, but it's only a secondary one, is that this method, because the strings are on and the guitar is under, neck is under tension, I'm leveling the frets with the effects of loading and compression on the frets already, or on the neck already, and that longitudinal compression seems to, from experience, seems to just slightly affect the way that frets sit in relation to each other. So if you were to do this the conventional way, with the strings off and the neck flat on the deck, and you level with a dead flat beam and so on, that's great, and you get a very good result. But when you put the neck back under load, you definitely, yes, you get a bit of curvature. That isn't really an issue. What you get is compression, and that throws the frets out very, very slightly. So this method gets around that, because you're leveling, I'm leveling here with that compression already at play. Okay, so that, I'm just going to get this a bit more in tune because it's horrible. Instantly tuning, very direct. Oh yeah, immediately. Perfect. Perfect. It's gone flat. Just pull these a bit more, but that's much nicer, much sweeter sound or feel to the relative tunings than prior. This is not good at the moment, I'll tell you about that in a minute, but having taken the strings off and on, you get still a bit of slack built back into them. That's getting me a little bit of fret slap, and I think that could be because this is now so flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the hex key and I'm going to just do the tiniest back pedal on the hex key, the neck relief, and just let that catch up. Okay, but that's pretty much there. So grab your hands from fret dust. So what I'm going to do now is going to take the strings off. I'm going to have a break, but when I come back I'm going to take the strings off and put them away as a spare set for sacrificial strings on another setup. I'm going to clean off all the dust, going to re-profile these frets so that the flat spots are shaped nicely to round arch shapes, and then going to mask off the neck, ready to polish out all the frets into a playing condition. But while I'm there, I'll have a look under here and see what we've got, and I'll fix these rattly bits and the loose bits and stuff. I'll show you that as well. But I'll take a break first and see you in a little bit. Mr. Morris turned up all wet. Aren't you, Morris? Morris. Hey. Trying to dry you off as much as possible, but you are... No. Come on, off there. There's a good boy. You. Good boy. He just let himself in out of the pouring rain. There we are. Happy to be inside? I've put the heater on for you. You should get a bit warm in a minute. You can't see. Sorry. You can't see anything right now because Morris is sort of in the way. I just brought my orange DIY SG in here because when I've done this I'm going to change the pickup. I'm going to put a Epiphone gold humbucker in the neck pickup because I don't like the P90 I've got in there. It's an IronGear one, it's the Alchemist one, but it just doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't stand out for me, so I'm going to get a shot of it. But anyway, it's down there. So are you going to find somewhere to set all down so I can carry on? Morris, are you just going to seek endless petting and attention? Morris. I've just sent a whole bunch of decals off to Rothko and Frost with your mugshot on them all for printing up in gold and black and white, metallic gold for logos. Yeah. £45 plus £5 postage. Cheeky devils. Right, what we're going to do, should we put you down? There's a good boy. Come on then. Come on then. Let's make this warm up. You go by there, it's nice and warm. Right. Yeah, so things to do quickly. I'll go off camera again in a minute, but yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'll just show you the oh sorry, you can't really see. I'll show you the fret reprofiling. Dave, you'll have seen this plenty of times before. Come on, why isn't this coming out of there? It's hooked up. When you have one of these adjustable nuts on the guitar, you have to be careful when you do change the strings. It can fall off. So if you somebody's threaded this through the horrible way. Yes, you can run the risk of the nut dropping off somewhere if you're not careful. How the hell is this? Guns, I hate this. Please don't do this, people. It doesn't need it. All that happens is you're going to increase the chance of me scratching your guitar. This tied round business, it doesn't work. It just ends up with bits wedged in here that I can't get out without using tools and stuff. Annoying. Another one. It really isn't necessary. It doesn't actually stop any of the issues. You heard, right, you saw how much detuning happened. I can't use these now basically aren't usable as even sacrificial strings, which is a shame, but they're going to go straight in the bin now because I can't be arsed with them. Yeah, you saw how much the strings detuned, right? So this wrapping them, tying knots in them didn't do anything for them at all. Right? It didn't. They aren't going to slip off, so it didn't help with that because they're never going to slip off anyway. It didn't. What the hell's? There's two holes on here. What was in there? Ah, someone's had a string butler on here. That's what it is. Well. I didn't even see that until now. How about that? I think that's what's been on there. I can't think of anything else that somebody would have put screws in the headstock like that. Oh, it's just a horrible deal. It's completely unremovable. Ghastly practice. I've seen techs and luthiers on YouTube before complaining when people do this, but seriously, it doesn't achieve anything at all. It just makes life difficult. You really don't, it doesn't improve anything. So take it from me, don't do it. You know, it'd be like if this was charging by the hour and you had to spend hours unpicking wires, then you wouldn't do it because it wouldn't be worth it. There's bits everywhere. Right, into the metal spares bag. Morris has let himself out. So now I've got three strings which are actually now tied up in here, and it's actually quite difficult to even begin to get them out. And the more faffing about you have to do with this, the more likely that you're going to scratch the paintwork in trying to get this out. It's complete annoyance. One of three. It's absolutely jammed, impossibly jammed. There's not a single chance of getting this out. It's utterly and completely locked. Oh my god, this is rubbish. Don't do it. You know, it's one of those really annoying mythological facts, you know, that somebody's told somebody to do. Oh yeah, you've got to lock your strings so that they don't magically unwind themselves and come flying off and wind backwards, because that's what strings always do. They don't. The gearing on your tuners makes that literally impossible. Right, can you see the two holes there? Yeah. Somebody had a string butler, which means they were having trouble with tuning and they thought that's what they need to do to cure it. Well, I can tell you it isn't. But there you go, it sells, you know, people will buy them. Okay, so what we need to do now is do the, sorry, you'd be dazzled by that, didn't need to. I need to do the reprofiling game. So I'm going to paint the tops of the frets again. Morris fur in my face now. And just in the house having something to eat, and there was, I think it was Revenge of the Clones, War of the Jedi, something, I don't know. And we were both, Claire and I were talking about how neither of us had any interest in the Star Wars tale after about, I suppose, maybe it was, I don't know, whichever one it was, Empire Strikes Back was probably it. And I can't help but think that my lack of interest is kind of directly inverse, no, yeah, my lack of interest is inversely proportional to the amount of computer graphics they used, or CGI. You know, this kind of endless. This clone thing was around about the sort of the time where CGI suddenly became the big thing. It seems to be very similar in feel to Starship Troopers, which in itself was quite a good film, because it had some very amusing sort of knowing issues, you know, it dealt with. It was quite ironic in a way, which the Star Wars films, pretty much after the originals, seem to lack any knowingness or irony or anything. So we're just sitting there now watching this kind of huge, massive CGI scenes where you're supposed to feel like you're engaged with a CGI version of, I don't know, whoever it was, Obi-Wan Kenobi or Yoda, as you know, as rendered by a computer, and it just, oh God, it just doesn't work. It really doesn't work. Not for my generation anyway, I think. Ah, God damn it. Right, so that's that bit done. I'm going to do is wipe off, brush off the dust. Yeah, so it's just, I have never been able to get engaged with those films at all. And I know it's, you know, it's supposed to be the same, dealing with the same characters, but it lost it. And I was just thinking back just then to the original Star Wars, you know, which was mostly mechanically, or almost entirely mechanically made. You know, so the height of special effects was to see Luke Skywalker's land speeder going across the deserts of Alderaan or wherever he lived. Tatooine, was it? I can't remember which one now. But yeah, you know, and that was, at the time we thought that was just absolutely incredible. But something about the limitations made it a much, maybe it was, you know, we were 14 or whatever it was at the time, but it seemed to make it a much better story, that it wasn't blinding you with special effects the whole way. I don't know. Just can't get into it. But the same reason I can't get it. In fact, I can't get into. I don't think there's a single CGI film that I can relate to that does CGI as kind of as if it were real. You know, like there's a IronGear Blues engines. Okay, there's a, you know, there's things like you know, anything that's CGI'd, like I don't know, Ratatouille or The Incredibles and stuff like that. You know, stuff that's deliberately, you know, it's cartoon CGI or animated CGI is great. But yeah, not the stuff that tries to make a, you know, a realistic world. So I'm just absolutely unmoved by the Lord of the Rings, all that stuff, and even Harry Potter and everything, all of that's utterly dependent on CGI for its surroundings. I think that's what it is actually. It's when the surroundings aren't even real. It just doesn't work for me. It's almost impossible to relate to characters in an artificial, for me, in an artificial surrounding. It's kind of weird, but Claire goes to me, it's meant to be make-believe, imaginary. And it's like, yeah, but I don't care. Right, so these are all slightly different screws, which is a bit odd. Or one of them is. Maybe somebody's mixed them up between the two pickups. Anyway, I won't take the rear one out, but they are, or take the person's word for it, and certainly Blues engines in the front. So I'll have a quick look in the back. We've got some tightening up to do. This needs moving. We'll do that while the strings are off, and before I do the polishing out. I'll have to mask off the whole of the neck with the fingerboard, which is just boring. I'll do it off camera. Okay, standard Tune-o-matic bridge. The intonation doesn't look quite right. These pots here, switching pots, push pulls, pull pushes. They're oh look, they're all coming off very easily. So I need to widen these little things out a bit. They're actually they are. It looks like a decent quality set of pots here. So I think you got a good. This is really rattly. Worries me. Got a good upgrade. Let's take care of this first. Yeah, for £100 or whatever it was. This is good set of pickups plus a very nice guitar. Maybe somebody's played this and kept this thing off, because it looks like somebody hasn't put it back on properly, or put it on as an afterthought maybe before advertising it for sale or something. So the way I do this is I tend to line it up on the hole, line everything up, and then sort of, well, I can't actually, it's too loose. Do it up a little bit, shall we? Get it lined up if you can. Get it lined up in place and lift the whole thing out. And if you can, get a let's get this one, that'll do. Get a pliers that will hold this in place. Stay put. There we go. That should pretty much line up. Nearly. Now with these pots that are the knobs which are a little bit loose, what I'll do is I'll just open the split posts a little bit so that they grip the pots more than they currently are, because there's no need for them to be floating about loose, or falling off, threatening to fall off so easily. Now where has that screw gone? Got it. That was annoying. Too close to the edge, you see. It's a very long screw for such a small hole, but it's too late now because it's already been put in here, so the hole is that big. Okay. Let's do this one first. We've got a few things to do here. We'll line up the old switch to the correct position, and this is typical. It comes loose and then it sort of walks its way around. These are nice quality pickguard screws type of thing, but they're incredibly long, and I really don't recall these being maybe they are the ones that come with Harley Bentons, but I don't ever remember them being that long. So the switch goes for a walk, so we need, right, thank you, let's leave the bridge there. So we need to be able to tighten it up whilst holding it in place, and I did make up this device which allowed me to shove that in there to stop the thing moving as I tightened it up, which I thought was quite good. So nice quality wiring and stuff in here. So it's been done up nicely. I don't think actually there's a little bit off centre on this hole, so I can't quite get it into the usual place. But now I've got this great device thanks to Martin, isn't it? Was it Martin? It was Martin, surely it was. Who sent me this? Oh God, I can't remember. Oh, I'm gonna have to. It's terrible. I've forgotten. And this actually isn't working on this one. It did pretty well on the last one. Maybe it had bigger. Maybe it's this side. What we don't want is this stupid thing to spin round. And that's quite tricky to keep that in one place whilst holding everything down. This seems to have two different hands. Stay put. Okay. Good. this little fella. Just move things along a little bit quicker. Yeah, very long. These out and have a look at the wiring loom thing in here. Oh yeah, nice quality stuff. Not seen these, this harness before, but it is a nice quality bit of kit. Never seen those switches before. A little black sort of, I don't know how well you can see that, but that's a new one on me. But somebody's paid a fair bit for that, so nice buy, Dave. But still, even with that, you still get the things coming loose and falling apart. Like the jack socket. So with that, we'll use this, which I bought from StewMac. It's one of their tools that I went ahead and splashed out on anyway, because I thought it was worth buying. So you go in there, you turn the other way until it locks. Then you get your spanner or whatever you've got onto there like that, and the whole thing stays in place, which is brilliant. You can really tighten that up, and then to undo it you just gently whittle that around like that until it comes undone. That is a very nice set of little pots. I can't even see the brand on them on there. Can't see who makes them, but they are unusual. But they've been very nicely wired in, or it's a nice unit, so somebody's made this and brought it in. You know, one of those wiring kits. Which seems kind of mad to have gone to that length. That's not even symmetrical, isn't that funny? It just seems bizarre to have gone to the lengths. That's probably 50 quid's worth of wiring loom. 75 quid's worth of pickups. So we're looking at 125 quid spent on upgrading the pickups, and there's a Clouson Deluxe, so I'm not even sure I don't think the Harley Bentons, none of the Harley Bentons I had came with Clouson Deluxe, but there you go. Anyway, so you know, even if they're upgrades, you know, you're looking at 150 quid, maybe 200 quid if those tuners are upgrades as well. And a thing set up like a pig, you know, what's the point? But anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to gently widen these, if I can, just a tiny little bit, so we can hopefully get those knobs to stay on. That's a bit better. It's not, we don't want to open them up too much, so we've got to be careful. But, just enough to get them to grip. Otherwise they'll just continue falling off at the first opportunity. very small amount, but just enough. No, that one's not enough. Better. You don't get to do that very many times. A couple of goes like that and it will break because the metal is made very cheap quality. Okay, so nearly ready to mask everything off and so on. So those are all those things attached, done up, everything's now tightened up. So next stage is mask all this off, and I'll go offline and do that, and I'll do the sanding offline as well. That will be just the standard thing I do with 3 grits of sandpaper followed by 9 grits of micro mesh to get it up to a nice finish, a nice shine. The bridge saddles, the bridge here, I don't know if you can see, but the saddles are kind of sticking up in funny places, so I don't know why that is. It's because of the springing on here is a bit funny. Each one is individually sprung, but I don't know if they're kind of pushing backwards on their own free will. I don't really understand why that is. It doesn't seem to me that would be an ideal situation, so I'm going to just push the springs back to flush as close as I can to the end piece, and presto, they're all staying in where they belong. Little things. So get that quick clean. Everything's in pretty good shape apart from those terrible action, terrible playability, terrible tuning stability. You know, basically everything that's important to make the thing play. But there you go, brilliant case study. Got nice equipment, just an unplayable thing. Anyway, I'll see you when it's done and I'm restringing and we're pretty much ready to finish off. Okay. Okie dokie, well, we're back. Frets all polished, fingerboard oiled, new strings about to be loaded. Where did the nut go? Ah yes, here's the nut. I just had to turn the radio off because I was listening to this wonderful suggestion in from government that all the National Health Service's problems could be fixed by you and I volunteering. That's right. And oh my god, the first thing that was said in the presenter, the lady presenter, woman presenter, who was talking about, she said, you know, well, so I think it's a fantastic idea. For example, you know, what if, you know, a child in hospital needs playing with, you could come in and help do that. And I was thinking, are you absolutely serious? In the world full of people looking for access to children in institutional places, and you're going to throw the whole thing wide open, and you know full well that it, you know, nobody's going to have the time to identity check anybody involved in this, you know, and it's never even going to happen. It's just I think it's a Daily Mail spouting off, coming up with a sort of its version of the big society or something like that. But just, you know, and the presenter was going on about, oh, but you know, we should have a world where we all volunteer and the world would be a better place and all that sort of stuff. And sure, yeah, you know, but the reality is it's unworkable. You can't take a bunch of, I mean, in wartime, yes, well, in the old days where there were no background checks and, you know, there was not a hysteria about paedophilia, and I mean, I'm not saying it was a good time, I'm just saying in those days people just volunteered and did things, and, you know, in wartime they had no choice. But nowadays, you know, with our systems of checking, and it just never happened. You would never get, you'd either never get the checks done, and the system would never come to anything, or it would just fail like it usually does, and you'd end up with either grooming gangs working in the hospitals, or individual paedophiles, or people going in and helping old ladies and then ripping them off, relieving them of their house contents and inheritance, and then signing over their, it's just in a country that's in a bit of divided state and turmoil. The idea of throwing open the hospitals to volunteers to come in and help people, vulnerable people. Well, and I also get that if you're in hospital these days and you don't have somebody fighting your corner like a member of the family, you can very well just fade away. I've seen it kind of going on. I've seen when I've been in visiting family and people didn't have anyone fighting their corner, were often in a terrible state. But surely that isn't fixed by throwing it open to so-called volunteers, and who knows who they would be. It just seems one of these crackpot solutions to a fundamental problem, which is we can't afford the current National Health Service we have, and nobody's willing to admit that and face up to what that actually really means. Even if it means getting rid of some of the excesses and the waste and the management layers and whatever the solutions are to making such a huge scale thing run. I don't know. I'm not a consultant who runs the NHS, but we carry on every day as if we can afford to fund it and give everybody free access at the point of need to treatments. And yet, there is a scarcity of resources, and if you're in hospital and you don't have somebody shouting in your corner for you, shouting for your needs and your rights, you can fade away pretty quickly. It's very demoralising. Anyway, like I say, my head reels at the the lack of imagination in the solution. Let's just get it run by volunteers. Yay. Bring back the war. 82% humidity. It is absolutely humid in here, and nothing I am doing with the machines is currently getting rid of that. Okay, so here I have new strings on, and I'm going to snip them all. I'm nearly done. So we've got the stretching out of the strings, we've got the intonation to set, which we've got the tuner here to do. That's good, and then we're done. In between times while the camera's been off, I've changed the pickup out on my orange Kit SG. I didn't like the IronGear P90 I had in the neck. I like this bridge humbucker. So I changed this out. I had some of these left over from Paul's Black Beauty. So I changed that out, and that's now. Let's take that for a jam tomorrow and see how that plays. Okay, so let's start by stretching the strings a bit, as much as I can. So I like to stretch it like this. I have got a test coming up with JT's custom build. When I get to put that together in this next week or so, he's got some locking tuners that we're fitting to that, and somebody was arguing or proposing online on YouTube that I need to put this other one on as well now, I think. Was proposing that stretching the strings is stupid. Strings cannot possibly stretch. If they were saying the only thing that's happening when you get the detuning, when you do this, is that it's pulling the thing tight round. the posts, and I think that's not true. I think there is some slack in these strings. I get the point, the guy saying it's steel, you're not actually stretching a piece of steel. Well, maybe not, I don't know, but it was an interesting possible experiment, and that is that if I get a guitar with locking tuners and there's no material wound around the posts to speak of, and they're fixed at this end and they're fixed at the locking part of the tuner, then theoretically there should be almost no detuning because there's no coiled slack to be pulling tight, which was his argument. So I think it'd be interesting to see whether that is or isn't the case, but we shall see. I suspect it's going to detune a lot more than he thinks it will, but we'll see when we come to it. Okay. Now these things have moved a little bit, so the nut may have risen up or gone down, for which I have the little key here. And then the bridge has probably moved a little bit too, but it's not the prime thing at the moment. I'm doing the tuning part. Okay, let me just check the action here. Okay, we're at 81%, it's starting to go down a little bit now, but it's taking its time. Okay, we're a little lower on there now than we were, and so it's actually need to come up a little bit. A little bit. Okay, so that's that. Now we tune stretch again, and when I've done this one, I also check the neck relief just to make sure that hasn't changed any in the time I've been doing things. Okay. Sorry about the background noise. I've got two of these little dehumidifiers running with the aim of I've got to get this down about 15% more if I'm going to do any work, but it is tipping it down with rain, so it may not be a prospect for tonight. May have to just give in if it doesn't come down any more than that. I like. Okay, so just do a couple of small adjustments. Bring up this. Actually, let's have a look. Bring the neck pick up a little bit up. Actually, down a bit. Good. Okay, one more stretch like this and we'll be just about on the stable. And then we'll be ready for a Monday dispatch back to Dave. Yeah, that's interesting, those holes on the headstock. I do think that's probably the result of what's called a string butler, whose purpose is to ease the tension or ease the passage of the strings through the nut, because of course the spread of the tuning pegs makes the strings go through at a funny angle. So on a regular nut, nut, the string butler moves the corner point, the turning corner point, out into the middle of the body around a little wheel, which is probably a little bit smoother in operation than trying to bend the string round a sharp angle at the back of the nut. That's the theory anyway. Okay, so now I've got that done, we're in the land of intonating, and that's going to be simple enough. Let's see if we can do it here. Can we do it without pressing on that? That's okay. So intonation is straightforward again. We want to ping the harmonic on the 12th fret and tune it to the note. And then fret it. It's interesting that you can be tempted to read it off the attack part of the note, and actually probably good to read it off the, that one's sticking out. It's probably good to read it off the decaying portion of the note. These things are crap. They're sort of moved of their own free will. Wow, that's well out. So is that. Huh. It's okay. Right, this top three are about right, and these other three should be in the same sort of ballpark, although they're too long. So, and the bridge is actually tilted back as it happens anyway, so I think it's staggered back this way, which is, in a sense, they should all be much more in a line than they currently are. All things being equal, but this, I don't have a horrible feeling this isn't going to solve the problem, and I get this feeling that these strings may not want to play ball. I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. Right. Drag these back quite a distance anyway. My favourite bridge type. Close. Let's bring that out a bit further, and this whole lot out a little bit. A couple more turns. Also, it's a bit deceptive because these are facing outwards, so the intonation point is quite a way different because these blocks are all facing the other way. That's a bit just misleading. So when you get it to here and you think all these saddles are, you start to think they're in a kind of a mirror or duplicate position of the first three. Actually, when you realise that because these three are all facing that way and the leading edge is there, and those three are all facing that way and the leading edge is 3mm back, actually it's not a very good, it's very visually misleading, and I think it's one of the stupid aspects of this bridge and its design. But it's given me a little hope that we might intonate okay after all of that. Just bring these out a bit further. Yeah, it's deceptive. So now we've reached the end of any possible adjustment. Where's this going? It's not going anywhere. How crap is that? Ah, lousy. I find it hard to keep my dislike of this bridge to myself. Oh, that's miles off. What? What is this doing? Hear that? Now what you're seeing there is one of these strange oddities, okay? That's an A string that is performing way out of line with the others. So, and you'd be really amazed at this. Electric acoustic, what? Find me the right one. Come on, 36. 36, no, one. I don't know what the what's it? I haven't got the boxes. Typical. The 9s I'm looking for. $32. I'm looking for a 32. That's the 32 in there, possibly. Yeah, if it's got that one in there, spare. Will it come on? 32, 36, 42, 32. That's about that. Right then. 32. Now, much as I'm not massively happy because I haven't got any more 9 sets in my rotor sound department. But I want to make a point with this, and that. Right, let's just show you one more time. I don't know how well you can see it. I'll do this again. It's quite important. Sometimes in the past I've not been able to believe what it shows. So there's my tuner. My tuner. A. 12th fret, A, D, so something about this A. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the A out, right? And we know what we saw just then, the amount of flatness that harmonic, that fretted note was for on the 12th fret, and it was saying that is flat. Oh Christ almighty, strings. That was flat of the octave, right? So here we have a replacement PRS string of the same gauge, 32. Right, I'll set this on. I need a bit of tuning up, stretching out as well. Let's get this on. Now remember, if it's flat, it's kind of telling you that the length, the playing length, is too long, which means you have to shorten it by bringing the saddle closer to the nut, which I've just done to quite some considerable amount. So obviously this is going to need a bit of stretching more than I'm going to give it right now, but let me just get it going. Okay. There you go. Look at that. A. Perfect. That is exactly how bad that A string was. Now I'm going to go and look for a D string in that box as well. I can't work in such a small space anymore. I really do need some more room. This is getting claustrophobic. Okay, so what was the D string? Do we know what it was we were looking for? It wasn't 42, it wasn't 32, it wasn't 36, so it was about 24. There you go. 24? Yeah, it's got to be, isn't it? 24, 32. Yeah. Okay, wound. This is the D string. Now I'll just show you it again. The original rotor sound D string, which is very rare, but tune it. Flat as well. Right, so watch this. So I guess I do want to share with you this thing that I've learned. If this happens to you, trust it. Just ditch the string and get another one. It's as simple as that. It sounds hard to believe because you can't even figure out what it is about that string that could have gone wrong in the factory to make it be so off in terms of its intonation. But you've just seen with your own eyes that's exactly how it works, and it is off, and the bottom line is you will never figure out probably why it's off or what about the mechanical process in the factory that makes it off. I wouldn't advise you to spend your time trying to figure it out. Rather just get shot of it. If I had a complete new set I would change them all out, but it's only those two strings that are really... Okay, let's do the D. There you go. Everything else is right. There, you've seen it there. Two strings in a pack. Duff. Don't even ask me why, because I don't actually know why, and it's not important. But these two are going in the bin. So just take my word for it. If that ever happens to you, don't question your sanity, just bin the string, or two in this case. This is the first time it's ever happened. I've had it happen twice before with a single string, and actually, bizarrely enough, it was A both times. Now it's the A and the D. It's the first time it's ever happened. But, like I said, if it happens to you, even on one string, hear my words in your head next time it happens to you, and don't mess around forever with the saddles. Just ditch the string. Even though it's money, ditch it. It's not worth struggling on with. So there you go. Woohoo! It's late. Yeah, it's late, so I'm not going to play a tune on this. I know it works. Everything's working fine, so sorry for that, no sound tests, but I'll put the truss rod cover back on, double check everything. Oh, it's very flat. Everything playing nicely. Little things fixed, that tightened up, these knobs tightened up, jack plug tightened up, everything in order, cleaned up. Frets levelled, fingerboard oiled, new nut fitted, adjustable nut fitted, which means we've got plenty of room to adjust it at will, at leisure, and then yeah, ready to go. And like I said at the beginning of this video, sorry it's taken so long, there's quite a few little diversions on this, but the thing that's amazing is, like I said, all the money that was spent originally on this guitar, and it still played like an absolute dog hound, but now it's playing much better. And actually this is probably, I might just tweak these a bit later on, because I think there's a bit more room to balance them out now we've changed those two strings. But there you go, now it's set up to play well. Okay, we're on 80 degrees. Let's see if we can reduce this. I don't think we can, you know, not in this rain. Anyway, thanks for watching. Sorry it was a long one, comparatively, and I'll see you soon.